Welcome, descendants of Atlantis. This is John Murray. I'm new to YouTube and I changed my channel name from Ancient Answers to However Clever because Ancient Answers returns so many searches when you look for it. I still plan on doing mainly ancient videos, so please stay tuned. Recently, Ancient Architects did a fascinating video on a new discovery at Hatnub, Egypt. I'll post a link below. He reported on a 4,500-year-old ramp contraption which many speculate was the method used to build the Great Pyramid. However clever that idea is, if you look at my video on how stone was moved, the first part of this series, you'll see that could not have worked. So then how did this 4,500-year-old contraption work? Stay tuned, you're about to find out. An article in Live Science dated October 2018 reads, "This 4,500-year-old system used to pull alabaster stones up a steep slope was discovered at Hatnub, an ancient quarry in the eastern desert of Egypt. This system is composed of a central ramp flanked by two staircases with numerous post holes. Using a sled, they speculate, my words, which carried a stone block and was attached with ropes to these wooden posts, ancient Egyptians were able to pull up the alabaster blocks out of the quarry on very steep slopes. But there may be another explanation, one given to us by an ancient historian named El-Masudi." So next, let's take a side trip here to an article in Thought.com dated August of 2017 titled, "The Ancient Secrets of Levitation. Cultures from the past may have had ancient secrets to build their monuments." And I quote, "Did ancient civilizations possess knowledge that has since been lost to science? Were amazing technologies available to the ancient Egyptians that enabled them to construct the pyramids, technologies that have somehow been forgotten? There is an intriguing passage in a history text by the 10th century Arab historian El-Masudi, known as the Herodotus of the Arabs. El-Masudi had traveled much of the known world in his day before settling in Egypt, and he had written a 30-volume history of the world. He too was struck by the magnificence of the Egyptian pyramids and wrote about how their great stone blocks were transported. First, he said, a magic papyrus paper was placed under the stone to be moved. Then the stone was struck with a metal rod that caused the stone to levitate and move along a path paved with stones and fence on either side by metal poles. The stone would travel along the path, El-Masudi said, for a distance of about 50 meters and then settle to the ground. The process would then be repeated until the builders had the stone where they wanted it. What I think this 4,500-year-old discovery probably represents, my words now, is that this exact system that El-Masudi described happened. So consider this scenario. The ancients carved a ramp with post holes along its sides. They would then place a stone at the bottom of the ramp. Then they would strike it with what we know as an Egyptian staff, but which were originally to the ancients massive tuning rods. These rods, when struck, would vibrate at a certain prescribed frequency. Then when they struck them, they would transfer their vibration, their frequency, to the stone. We have all heard of and seen the mysterious knobs of the megalithic stones which Brian Forster has made famous. For some years now, I've speculated that the purpose of those stone knobs was so that when the ancients struck the stone with a tuning rod, they didn't risk cracking and ruining the stone. If the knob cracked, that was no big deal. The post holes contained also tuning rods along the path, which were connected above at their tops by wire or some form of conductive material that conducted the sonic vibration between them. The magical papyrus described by El-Masudi were possibly some form of material that enabled the tuning rod to do its job free of the block's attachment to the Earth's quote-unquote gravity. And please see my previous video on the possibility that gravity doesn't really exist. If we look at a video done by ancient architects titled, "How the Ancients Cut Stone with Sound, Lost High Technology Explained," at 8 minutes and 15 seconds we see an image of two such tuning forks connected, with a stone block between them, on a statue of Isis. These tuning rods in the post holes then resonated at the same frequency needed to keep the stone blocks vibrating at the higher level needed to levitate them. I believe, possibly, that originally the ancients had these rods posted all along the path in the post holes, the path which they used to levitate and transport the blocks. The stairs on either side of the ramp were there for the workers to walk on as they moved the blocks. This same construction is seen as reported by ancient architects at another site, Zayat el-Arian. But after the cataclysm, as eons passed, more and more of these tuning rods were lost, broken, or dysfunctional in some manner, so fewer were available to do this work. Hence, eventually, so few remained that survivors using them had to levitate a block about 50 meters and then stop and reposition the tuning rods, strike them again, and levitate the block another 50 meters, and so on and so on. And this is what al-Masudi described, because that was what was most recently in the memory of the dynastic Egyptians. But this gets to the larger point, that probably the early dynastic Egyptians still had some of these rods remaining and knew how to use them. In this same video, Ancient Architects tells us of a room discovered in Egypt which was purportedly full of these rods. I do not believe the system found at Hatnub likely was used with pulleys, as modern-day archaeologists prescribe, as I've explained in the first part of this video series. As Ancient Architects speculates, I think originally this site was taken over by the dynastic Egyptians and originally was left there by the ancients. Now let's take a side trip to Mysterious Universe, October 2017. While it has long been theorized that a second Sphinx once existed, historians and authors Gary Cannon and Malcolm Hutton are said to be working on a book revealing that, or at least what's left of it, is buried in a mound next to the Great Sphinx, the Great One. My words. While they have some new ideas on the age of the Great Sphinx, much of their research seems to be based on years of prior work done by Egyptologist Bassam el-Shama. So next, let's go to Dr. Robert Schoch's website, the link below, where he has an article entitled The Great Sphinx. She was a lioness of Mehet who guarded an ancient archive. We see here images of the Sphinx with rods stuck in its back. Dr. Schoch and others theorize that these rods in the back of the Sphinx represent symbols of power, hieroglyphs, or actual physical keys meant to open up perhaps the Library of Records. I suggest that they are all both correct and they are all wrong. Consider this scenario. 1. The huge rods sticking out of the back of the Sphinx were not exaggerated in size. They actually were that large. 2. These were massive tuning rods stuck into the holes in the back of the Sphinx. 3. In some drawings there are 3 of these rods, which I personally think is more likely. 4. The acts you see on the top of the rods in the pictures on Dr. Schoch's site were not there to represent symbols of power, as many believe, except that they were adopted to be that by later dynastic Egyptians who lost knowledge of what they truly were. But rather, these axes represent that once the tuning rods were slid into place in the back of the Sphinx, they were then struck very hard with a huge tool represented by the axe, which looked like the axe. And that ignited or vibrated the tuning rods. Then once the rods began to vibrate, they would then be the key to vibrate the underground Giza Plateau. Yes, the entire Giza Plateau. This then would turn on the pyramids, or be at least one part of turning on the pyramids, which then would begin the cycle of tapping into the battery of the earth to generate electromagnetic power for the reasons and purposes and methods discussed in my video series, Ancients Image. Some years ago, while listening to Art Bell, a guest told of how when the Millennial Band was practicing on the Giza Plateau, they began to play the musical scales upwards, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and then the entire Giza Plateau began to vibrate, so much so that they got scared and stopped playing the scales. These rods actually were then tuning forks, keys, to ignite the plateau, not to turn in a lock, but keys to turn on a vibration. Later they were just symbols to the dynastic Egyptians. Then it is to be asked, but there are no holes in the back of the Sphinx. But remember, there was a second Sphinx, next to the extant one. That one likely did have holes in its back. Some reports say it was destroyed by lightning or it blew up. I think this may be close to correct. Possibly, someone found the 3 key tuning forks, stuck them into the lioness's back, struck them with the axe to ignite them and turn on the Giza Plateau. But they used them incorrectly, and the resulting sonic energy release blew up the Sphinx, and that has been my theory for some time now. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, give this video a like if you liked it, and forward it to all your friends. So next, I'll do part 3 of this video series.